All right, in this video, we're going to be looking at 7.12 variations in populations, specifically talking about the role of variation in providing survivability for a population or vice versa. Obviously, variation is just a different combination of alleles and phenotypes in a population, allowing for diversity of phenotypes, which allows for adaptability. These things result ultimately through events like mutations, crossing over in meiosis, other sorts of, like independent assortment and that kind of thing that happens in sexual reproduction. And so any kind of variation is generally good for a population. When variation is lost in a population, their ability to adapt and survive changes. It actually decreases. Snow leopards are a great example of this. Population size decreases, thus variation in that population decreases, and their ability to adapt becomes weakened, and so they are more susceptible to environmental changes. A good example of this in recent years is the California condor. In 1987, they became extinct in the wild. What that means is that the only living birds are in captivity. And what happened was is they captured the last living 27, and from them they were able to create a new population. California condors had been susceptible to a lot of modern problems, power lines in particular, um, poaching, lead poisoning, and some other things. And so they took them in and they bred them, and the current population of California condors is all a result of that captive breeding effort. But the problem with that is it's a very low stock, and so you have very low gene pool and very low diversity, which is not good for this feature of that particular species. Genetic diversity provides more resilience to a population. This shows the diversity in human populations, and typically human populations, 100, 200 years ago, especially, were more isolated due to geographic stresses like mountain ranges, deserts, and those sorts of things. And so you see more diversity where there's more ability for for the gene pool to spread out. In other words, and so where there's more diversity, there's going to be more uh, adaptability and ability to survive stresses. Um, Interestingly enough, too, um, diversity seems to be higher near where humanity began and lower out toward the extremities of that. And so, a good example of this is antibiotic resistance in bacteria. Um, you have bacteria that are susceptible to antibiotics, but if there's a high amount of diversity in that uh, bacteria population, then some of those bacteria, just by random chance of mutations, are going to be resistant to that antibiotic. And then those bacteria will survive and then reproduce and create a new strand of bacteria that is resistant to antibiotics, which is not good for us, but that's how that works. And so, one thing to point out too is that some alleles are by definition bad for the environment that they are found in, and so those alleles tend to be selected against, and so the individuals that have those alleles tend to die. But as we've learned with Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, those recessive alleles never go away. And so these are oftentimes called deleterious alleles or deleterious traits. And these are traits that reduce the chance of survival by definition, which is the opposite of an adaptive trait, which increases the level of survival. Um, this is one of the problems with inbreeding, is that inbreeding tends to cause those deleterious traits to come back out in a population, and having a higher degree of those recessive alleles coming back. And so a population that is more diverse and a population that has more gene flow is more likely to survive than one that is more isolated and inbred.